The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into their seats, unaware that their flight would soon become the center of a nationwide storm. Among them sat Senator John Kennedy, his calm Southern drawl and easy smile masking the fatigue of countless days on the campaign trail. The flight attendant, Melissa Hayes, moved briskly through the aisle, her jaw set with quiet frustration. She had seen Kennedy's speeches on television, heard his words dissected in break rooms, and today she decided she had heard enough. The tension crackled as their paths crossed, polite words exchanged, a disagreement over seating, then a spark that ignited an inferno. Moments later, Kennedy was standing on the jet bridge, disbelieving, as the gate door closed behind him. Melissa's heart pounded as she watched the plane door seal shut. A mix of triumph and anxiety swirling in her chest. She told herself she had done the right thing. No one, not even a senator, should treat flight crew with arrogance. Yet doubt crept in as whispers spread among passengers, some applauding her, others shaking their heads. Back in the galley, she tried to focus on her duties, but her hands trembled as she poured coffee, her mind replaying the scene over and over. She didn't know that just 7 minutes later, the airline she worked so hard to represent would begin to crumble under the weight of public outrage. The story was already exploding online, painted not as an act of integrity but of intolerance. On the tarmac, Kennedy stood quietly, his team scrambling around him, trying to contain the situation. Cameras appeared as if from thin air, reporters sensing blood in the water. But instead of anger, Kennedy's face showed disappointment, not just in Melissa, but in what the moment represented. He could have lashed out, made it political, turned it into a weapon. Instead, he spoke softly to the cameras. Sometimes we forget that behind every uniform and every title, there's a person who's fighting their own battles. I hope she finds peace in hers. The quote spread like wildfire, reshaping the narrative entirely. Kennedy's calm dignity stood in stark contrast to the airline's silence, and the public took notice. By the time the plane touched down, Melissa's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from friends, threats from strangers, and eventually, a terse email from management. Report to HR immediately. The pit in her stomach deepened as she walked through the terminal, the bright airport lights suddenly harsh and cold. In the conference room, 3 executives sat waiting, their faces masks of corporate politeness. They spoke of policy violations and public image, but she could feel their fear. Fear of headlines, of investors, of a nation choosing sides. By the end of the meeting, her badge lay on the table, her career reduced to an apology and a signature. That same evening, the airline's CEO faced the press, his smile tight, his words rehearsed. "We are committed to equality and respect for all passengers," he declared, trying to steer the company out of a storm that was now far beyond his control. But the internet had already made its judgment. Millions canceled their bookings. Hashtags demanding boycotts trended across every platform, and stockholders began pulling out. Within 7 minutes of that press conference ending, the airline's market value plummeted. By morning it was clear the company was in free fall. Not because of one act, but because of years of arrogance finally catching up. Melissa sat alone in her apartment, blinds drawn, scrolling through a flood of news coverage. Each headline stung worse than the last. Her righteous anger had melted into regret, then shame, and now something deeper, reflection. She had acted out of frustration, but it wasn't just about Kennedy. It was about years of exhaustion, disrespect, and the invisible weight that comes from serving thousands yet being seen by none. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from an unknown number. "Melissa, it's John Kennedy. I'd like to talk." Her breath caught as she stared at the screen, unsure whether to respond. When she finally answered, his voice was calm and steady, the same tone that had captivated crowds and cameras alike. "Melissa," he said, "I think we both had a bad day. But bad days don't define who we are. How we rise from them does." His words weren't political, they were human, and they cracked something open inside her. They spoke for nearly an hour, not about politics or careers, but about humanity, forgiveness, and the quiet courage it takes to admit mistakes. When they hung up, Melissa felt lighter than she had in months, as though the weight of the world had shifted just enough to let in a sliver of light. Days turned into weeks, and the airline's collapse became a case study in corporate fragility, how one moment of pride could topple an empire built on pretense. But out of the wreckage, something unexpected grew. Kennedy proposed a bipartisan initiative to promote empathy training in customer service industries, and to the world's surprise, Melissa became one of its first advocates. Together, they toured universities and organizations, telling their story, not as adversaries, but as examples of what understanding can heal. Audiences wept, not because of scandal, but because of redemption. Melissa's journey became one of transformation, from shame to purpose, from silence to voice. She learned that strength isn't about always being right. It's about being willing to face when you've been wrong. Kennedy, too, found that leadership meant seeing beyond conflict, beyond headlines, into the hearts of those who opposed him. Their paths, once divided by anger, now crossed in shared compassion. Each step of their story reminded people that forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it can rebuild hope. Years later, when a new airline invited Melissa to train its first crew, she walked onto the tarmac with her head held high. The same hum of engines filled the air, but this time it sounded different, like a promise of new beginnings. She paused, looked at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Kennedy, not to fate, but to the lessons that hardship had taught her. The world remembered the airline that collapsed in 7 minutes, but Melissa remembered the moment she learned to rise again. And in that truth lay the story's greatest flight, not through the air, but through the human spirit's capacity to grow, forgive, and soar.